Hi everybody, welcome to the next online lesson. Today we're going to look at education in Nazi Germany, how they took control of the schools and changed the lives of young people, with the primary focus of creating future soldiers. I love this topic. I find it very interesting, probably as a teacher, and hopefully you will too as a student, because you go to school. You can absolutely relate to the sort of system where you are taught certain things, and hopefully you can see how it can be easily manipulated as well. So a really fascinating lesson this one is. So thinking about the aim to evaluate the policies and purposes of education under the Nazis. Why did they do it? What was their overall goal? Okay, so let's get straight into it. It's nice and easy, this lesson, quite a short one really if you're watching this online. But still a few sources that we can evaluate and think about, as well as considering whether we think the policies were successful or not. I think what is useful to keep in mind with this one is if you're revising education, probably want to be revising the Hitler Youth at the same time. Both of them go hand in hand. They consolidate each other. They reinforce what they're learning at each different type. So what they do in school, they generally will reinforce when they go to the Hitler Youth later on that night, and vice versa. So that's probably important to revise these two things together. And if you are watching this for the first time because you missed the lesson, then keep that in mind as well when we do the Hitler Youth topic. Okay, so let's start with this photograph. What we can see, this might look quite familiar to you from your primary school days, where you would take your work up to show the teacher at the end of the lesson, hand in your books and things like that. So obviously here we can see this cue. The teacher is sat there doing his work. I suppose you would have to make sure that your work is of a really good standard, because this is the point in which it'll stand out and you will then stand out. So nothing too dramatic really in terms of school. Probably do this a little bit less in secondary school, but you might, if you're watching this from a different school, this might be the norm for you, but definitely primary school. But we can see also all boys in this particular class. We'll see as we go through this lesson how that might well be a deliberate choice. Okay, so just a nice little way to start to relate this thing back to what we do every day. So the aims for education were quite simple, and you'd have to be repeating this probably in an assembly every morning or something similar. I will be obedient, idolize Hitler, be physically fit, think of Germany before myself. I will do everything possible to make sure the German race stays pure. Then the boys will say, I will be a strong fighter. Then the girls will say, I will have many children for the Führer. So you're probably saying this every morning in tutor time or assembly. Remembering as well with the lesson on women, what was the expectation on women? All of it is just perfectly combined with each other. There was no escaping the propaganda or the indoctrination in Nazi Germany. Try not to see them all as just separate entities like school, women's policies. All of it worked together, and the Hitler Youth as well. Now, the facts of this bit is all children will attend school at least until the age of 14. Boys and girls will be separated by their gender, as we've just seen in that photograph. And you'll see why in this lesson. They've got different things that they need to be working on. All church schools are now banned. All schools are now state controlled. So basically anything that was like controlled by someone else, they're gone because the Nazis couldn't make sure they were doing what they wanted. Religion wise, year 11's watching this for revision. You've done the religion stuff. You can see why they got rid of the church schools, particularly when they promised the Catholics that they wouldn't. So again, like I say, all of this works together hand in hand. It has to, in order to get to what it was trying to do, which was total control, a totalitarian regime. All right, education, therefore, the basis from the education minister was to create Nazis. That's what school's purpose is, to create Nazis, to create conforming young people who do exactly as they're told, do not question, do not challenge. Girls are to grow up and be mums, boys are to grow up and be soldiers. That's it. So the education minister, Bernhard Rust, has said that education is to create Nazis. Okay, so teachers and parents in this new regime, once they take power in 1933, the educational principles of the new Germany, what schools and parents need to know about the goals of National Socialist education. So just like when your parents sometimes get letters from school or carers telling you about the uniform or things that are happening, this was the same there. All those involved in education must have a clear and unified idea of the educational tasks before them. The four iron pillars of the national school and educational system are race, military training, leadership, and religion. So in race, you must know that without our people, you are a miserable nothing. And that is better if you yourself die than that of our people and our fatherland perishing. So basically, the race is going to be taught what is the master race and anything that is not a master race. Military training in our schools, the Nazi schools, you must be resolved to defend the fatherland with your lives. So you must be prepared to die for this. It's what you're taught in school. Leadership skills, you must learn to obey so that you, having yourself learned to obey, can believe in and trust your own leadership and can grow to be leaders yourself. Clearly, we're aiming for war leaders here, soldiers, military leaders, aren't we? But basically, leadership is you do what you're told. And then lastly, religion. God and nation are the two foundations of the life of the individual and the community. The National Socialist State will promote such a deeply religious educational system. Now, that's interesting, and some of the things that we're seeing around the world right now, the maybe rise of some Christian nationalism, fundamentalism that is taking shape in schools, where the Ten Commandments in America, for example, I think they're about to be enforced in all classrooms in the country, just things like that. And again, please don't misconstrue that. That is just an example of what's happening. We're not saying that America is a Nazi state, but similar things where we're trying to get a political point or religious point, schools seem to be a good place to start with that. Okay, so all in all, that is the information that the parents get and the teachers, and it's their duty to make sure that they follow these 4 pillars. All right, so this source is just really interesting to me. This is from 7th of April 1933, so we're after the election where Hitler got his 288 seats. The Reichstag fires happened, all of that stuff's happened. And this is what he says, the Reich Chancellor Adolf Hitler. The government has enacted the following law. Civil servants, including teachers, may be dismissed from office in accordance with the following regulations. Basically, any teacher who goes against the system is sacked. Civil servants, including teachers who have entered the service since November 9th, 1918. Okay, so that is after the Kaiser abdicated, remember? So that's basically what Hitler's going back to. The beginning of the Weimar Republic, Ebert taking power, and then obviously they signed the armistice on the 11th. So we're going back to November 9th here. Without possessing the required or customary educational background or other qualifications are to be dismissed from the service. In other words, anyone who qualified in the Weimar years cannot be a teacher. Civil servants who are not of Aryan descent are to be retired. So any teacher or anyone in the civil service working for the government in public service who are not Aryan or do not have Aryan in their family, they have to retire. That's crazy. And then lastly, civil servants whose previous political activities suggest they will not at all times give their fullest support to the national state can be dismissed from the service. So basically, the first thing he's done after a couple of months in power is he's got rid of all the civil servants and all of the teachers who he deems a threat to him or someone who doesn't support the Nazi regime. That is madness. However, he did say he was going to do that before he was elected, and he was elected. So this is what it was happening in Germany straight away. Okay, so we can see the tone of education literally was priority. Also, for teachers and parents, as from April of 1933, a law has been passed, as we've just said, to allow teachers to be sacked if the state deems it necessary. 180 of those teachers under this new law were sacked straight away. All teachers must swear an oath to Hitler and join the National Teachers League. The NTL will run political education courses, or we would call today CPD, Continuing Professional Development, for teachers setting out our Nazi ideas. They expected 200,000 teachers to attend these courses. All textbooks will be rewritten to fit the Nazi view of history and racial purity, and Mein Kampf will become a standard text. Okay, so similarly around the world, we've seen where there is a demand in some states to put a Bible in every school. I think in our school, certainly, we've got Bibles. We've got Bibles in the RE room. But there's Bibles in the school, maybe less so just there, but actually to be used. Well, in this case, Mein Kampf is to become a standard text studied by all students. And then this bit is interesting. I need you to probably write this bit down. This is really quite important. Exceptional students who stand out for their leadership skills, military prowess, their nastiness, aggressiveness perhaps, as well as if they are Aryan, they would be sent to these special schools called Napolers. Okay, they're boarding schools basically for the future leaders, the elite. So they are going to be in the SS probably, they are going to be Aryan, but they just have this little something about them that stands out that would make them particularly good SS workers. There's no religion in these schools and there's extra PE. This is about creating the elite to be in the SS and the SA and the elite soldiers. So that's where you'd go if you were of a particularly good standard. All right, teachers will teach the children, so remember these letters are going out to the parents, that's why it's in the first person, to do the Nazi salute, start and end of each lesson by saying Heil Hitler, and Nazi posters and flags will decorate your child's classroom. Essentially, we're Nazifying the classroom, aren't we? So this is what the teachers are getting straight away, and the parents are also getting these letters. And obviously, there's not an awful lot they can do about this, is there? The parents can't take the kids out of school because they'll stand out as perhaps anti-Nazi. So really, they're making it clear, making it formal, but this is where we're going with our education story. So the curriculum, that's obviously the first thing that's going to come to our mind. We're going to be studying race studies and eugenics. So in this new curriculum, some subjects have gone that are of no use to anyone. You're going to be taught how to classify different racial groups and decide the superiority of the Aryans, and how you will not marry inferior races, and how to also look out for inferior races so that you don't ever fall in the trap of having a relationship with one, or so you can see them and bully them, or whatever it is that you were expected to do. Race studies and eugenics are going to be key on your curriculum. Maths lessons will be no longer things that you might think boring in maths, trigonometry or whatever. They're going to reflect the society that we believe in, and they're going to prepare you for military tactics. You'll see in a minute in this lesson, one of the maths, or a couple of maths tasks definitely have a sinister tone to them. PE and sport is going to be doubled. This is to be creating strong, healthy workers and mothers, especially for the girls' PE classes. They're going to be strengthening your core and middle and abdomen, because you are expected, remember, to be having at least 4 children with a hope of up to 10. Boys and girls will also follow this separate curriculum. Girls will focus on domestic service, basically to make you suitable as a wife and a mother. You're learning how to run the house. And boys, you're learning, obviously, to be leaders, military soldiers. Okay? So before we look into some of the examples of this topic, it's really straightforward, as I say, and quite a quick lesson. But the gist of what we're talking about has happened. This lesson so far, in just the first 12 minutes, that's what you kind of need to know about the Nazi education system. But here's Hitler saying in May of 1933, when an opponent declares, I will not support you, I calmly say, your child belongs to us already. How important are you? You will soon be gone. Your children, however, now stand in our camp. That's quite a brutal response to these parents who are against the Nazi regime. And obviously, as the terror thing kicks off, no one would ever say out loud something like this. But at the beginning, perhaps people didn't think it was going to be quite as serious as it became. Hitler's response is very much so. I don't care about you. You're done. You're gone. I can't change your mind, but I can, and I am controlling your children from now on through the Hitler Youth and through education. Okay, so that's quite an interesting source. Again, straight from the horse's mouth, Hitler said this. The blue circles are basically just a little summary diagram of what we've just talked about. So if your notes are lacking a little bit, just maybe draw this diagram. That seems to be a minimum I think you get away with. And obviously in a paragraph, this might well be explain why the Nazis were able to, control society. Education could be one paragraph, or maybe explain why the Nazis were able to control the youth. Education, this lesson could be one, Hitler Youth could be another, and maybe girls, experience of girls. So this is a lovely topic that could fit into almost anything really. And remember, as we've talked about in the Hitler Youth lesson already, a perfect section B would be that some children enjoyed it, some children didn't, some children, or it was successful, the policies, and an idea that it wasn't. Okay, so that's where we're kind of going with this. Let's have a look at some tasks. These are just sort of silly, but genuine. This would be a starter activity. So have a little read of this and then get rid of the screen, pause it and get rid of the screen and copy these statements in the back of your books, okay? And then when you're ready, come back and see if you were able to copy it exactly. Now that you've just done that, this is the key bit for this task. The instructions were clear. The teacher would be expected to give these instructions once, and you would be expected to follow instructions exactly as stated. So this says in the back of your book. Now, when we did this in class, loads of people always do it in the front or do it wrong. And we can see straight away those children who perhaps stand out for the wrong reasons. They cannot follow instructions. And it says copy the statements as you see it. If you didn't put Germany on its own line, and things like that, or capital letters and stuff. If it wasn't exact, you would be hauled up to the front of the class and you would be humiliated. The point being, you have to follow instructions exactly as it's meant to be. No misinterpretation. So this is a good example for a starter that can show you that. But also, taking that bit aside, look at the content of the task. It's anti-Semitic. It's attacking the Jewish kids and the Jewish people who never fought in the war, and Jews aren't German and all this kind of stuff. And remember, at this point, at the start of it, you'd have Jews in your class. The worst bit for this whole topic for me is that these Jewish kids were your friends. Your families used to go out together, just like you do with your friends, your cousins, you go on bike rides, holidays together. The Jews and the Jewish kids in your class were once your friend. Now, all of a sudden, you're being told that you are not supposed to like the Jews, and you're probably sat next to them thinking, oh my God, this is a bit weird. But this is the beginnings of it, where alarm bells start ringing. All right, so race relations, as we've talked about, you might get a task like this, where you get a list of different races, and you have to make up as many inappropriate relations as you can from the above list. The teacher will probably have a laugh about it, but you are essentially just being told the only thing that is good is Aryan and Aryan. But the task is making you try and come up with as many bad ones as possible, just to reinforce the idea that all of these other races are bad and nowhere as good or superior as the master race. And then they'd obviously say which is good, and clearly they'd have kids up in the front matching people off and stuff, and humiliating the Jewish kids as well. Okay, it was brutal. It was horrible. Bit of biology and eugenics. So this blue box, we'll see the Aryan race is tall, long-legged, slim, male height of about 1.74 meters. The race is narrow face with narrow forehead and narrow high-built nose. They're basically just suggesting what a perfect Aryan is. Their hair is smooth, straight, color is blonde, all that stuff. And of course they're saying to the teachers saying in the classrooms, you're good. You're not. You know, as a kid, that as a student, especially now you're a bit older, but when you were younger, that kind of ridicule and that kind of pressure would have utterly been horrendous. Some of you don't even like answering a question without going red. So this kind of like public humiliation is awful. So the kids are taught in these lessons to measure their skulls, to classify racial types. On the Google Classroom in the Hitler Youth section, we've put some videos on there that show you this in action. Real footage from Nazi Germany, just fascinating really. So if you're watching this because you missed the lesson, make sure you watch those videos as well. They're taught how Aryans are superior, the master race, and eugenics taught girls how to produce perfect offspring by selecting the qualities in the parents. Okay, so picking a good boyfriend or good man who they have been taught will make a perfect father and husband, and obviously he's being taught to pick you too. So that's how the eugenics works. It's a little bit like in biology with your chromosomes, your X's and your Y's. And if you do sort of breed cats, dogs or horses or something, you know that you always put the best male with the best female, and the offspring should be as strong as possible. So that's the kind of lessons that we're learning. But instead in Nazi Germany, they were learning that about humans and the best humans to mix with to get the best offspring. That's the point about creating this master race. Okay, so it's kind of subtle in some ways. The kids probably in some ways didn't even realize it was happening, but the constant reinforcing of this thing, eventually the kids just become indoctrinated and will just believe it and go home and say these things to their parents. Most parents who are not Nazi supporters will be horrified, but as we've seen by the start of this lesson, they had no choice. Otherwise they could find themselves in trouble. So how would it feel to be in this class and not fit this description? Obviously, you can write that, but it's not really a notes thing for your exam. It's more for you to just think about while you're watching this video. How would it feel to be that? Think about yourself. Would you fit in? Would you not fit in? This is why this topic's so interesting and so relatable, which is why I find it probably one of the best, one of my favorites. All right, here's an example of a bit of a timetable, really. So registration, lesson 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can see they're sort of limited in there, but we've got German, we've got history. History, obviously, I believe, that's why I'm a historian, is really important. But in this case, history is going to be manipulated to be the history of what the Nazis want to do. So they rewrite the textbooks, obviously talk about the Treaty of Versailles and all those things. And obviously the beginning bit, we start with the salute, the oath, the Hail Hitler, all that stuff. Then you have race studies. Then the girls go on and have their cooking and needlework and house things while the boys do physics. PE for both, but the girls is dance and fitness, probably because they're going to have to carry loads of children and be quite fit. And the boys are doing drills, military, boxing, football, things that are going to make them strong, maybe a bit aggressive, especially if they lose in these boxing matches. That'd be quite humiliating, so they would be determined not to lose. Same as the Hitler Youth sort of topics. And then we're ending in maths, and you'll see in a minute with source J that maths is not maths as you know it. It has a definite tone to it. So that's an example really of a day in an average school, probably in all schools to be honest. It's a totalitarian government, isn't it? So every school will have the same kind of curriculum. And this is just another example from a girl's timetable. You can see the afternoon is basically put down to picking your perfect husband, how to be a good mum and wife, learning how to be a domestic goddess, if you like. But they've still got their history and geography and the singing, and German is there as well as ideology. So those lessons there, you're going to be learning about National Socialism and how it's good and everything else is bad. All right, so anti-communism and stuff like that. Dead easy, dead straightforward. You could probably work this out just with your own experiences of what you would do to run a Nazi school. All right, so here's a maths example. It's not the source J one we're going to see in a minute, but this is a maths task, okay? So stop the video and do the task, see if you can get your answer, and then come back to it. Okay, so hopefully you've got the answer there. But for me, and what I'm going to try and say to you now is the answer is irrelevant. There are 300,000 mentally ill people in care. How much these people cost to keep in total if they're 4 Reich marks a day. So that's the easy maths, okay? You work at that, 300,000 times 4. Then you've got what you need. You've got your thing. It says how many marriage loans. So remember those loans that we talked about in the women lesson to encourage people to get married. How many loans could the state afford if they weren't paying for the mentally ill? In other words, you can hopefully see the point of this maths task. And if you're a kid who's got somebody at home who has anxiety or maybe falls into any of these mentally ill categories, you might be sat there thinking, whoa, this is a bit crazy. That's like my family. But you are learning in maths, not that maths is not important. What you're learning is that basically the mentally ill are a negative drain on society. They cost too much and the state could spend more money on better things for the Nazi state. So you go home and you maybe say to your parents, oh, granddad needs to go, he's costing the state this much, or auntie or uncle, blah, 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 blah. And you start having these conversations. Again, most parents would be just absolutely disgusted by that. But those parents that are buying along to it, they might start agreeing. And then you start thinking about the T4 program that you'll know about if you are revising this video in year 11. And if you're watching this because you missed the lesson, we'll do the T4 program shortly, but we did do it in year 9 where they obviously bumped off young, disabled, mentally and physically disabled people. And some parents handed over their children to be removed or cleansed from the master race, if you like. So this example of a maths task is really horrible. It's really sinister. It doesn't even matter about the maths. It matters that the point they're making is mentally ill people are a drain. And this is the one that was in the timetable example before, source J, a maths lesson, and it's talking about if a plane takes off carrying 12 bombs, each weighing 10 kilos, it bombs Warsaw, but they've taken any opportunity to teach you anti-Semitic stuff, Warsaw being the world centre of Jews, that's where all the Jews are. So you're learning there to bomb the Jews, and then it takes off and blah, 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 blah. Again, the maths is irrelevant, but it's asking you what was the weight of the aircraft. Doesn't matter. Work it out. Get it right, because you'll be humiliated if you don't. But the point here is it's telling these kids Jews are bad and you're bombing Warsaw where all the Jews are. Most of the Nazi kids, if they are particularly Nazified by this point, they're loving this, they're laughing along, and they're saying, yeah, get the Jews, and things like that. You can almost certainly imagine the lessons where that's happening from your own experiences in school. Okay. PE is pretty standard. They are doing the salute before they start, and they're going to play football and have a great time. Like I've just said with the curriculum, though, it's going to be physical stuff that makes them fitter, boxing, wrestling, running, essentially things that create fit, strong men, as well as violent men. If you lose in these boxing matches, you'd be humiliated by the teachers and each other in order to make you stronger and come back even more determined. And as we saw that with the Hitler Youth story, remember what we said at the start of this lesson, all of it works perfectly together. And then history. Let's have a look at the history syllabus, okay? So you can pause the video and look at some of this bit if you really want to, but the gist of it is it's anti-Semitic. So you can see the stuff that you're studying. The Treaty of Versailles is in there. World War I is in there. It talks about vengeance and stuff like that. It mentions there 1720, week 1720, the stab in the back, the Dolchstoss, all that stuff that we've talked about. It's a very similar curriculum, but look how the syllabus has related all of it to the Jews, sort of essentially blaming the Jews for everything. This is why they grew up so angry and so willing to do what they did in Auschwitz and later, because they've had 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years of this kind of education, as well as obviously all the propaganda as well. So that's really quite interesting to see the actual Nazi syllabus. It's a photocopy of their syllabus. So although this is a history curriculum, what are pupils really being taught? Answer that question. So pause the video and answer that question, but try and pick something specific out of it. What is it that they're being taught? In the 21 to 24 week, Erzberger is one of those politicians who was assassinated, remember, in the early Weimar years. So you can maybe pick out any of this stuff, but look at the lessons. What is it that they're being taught? The last fight against the Jew, the Jewish press, Judah's foe, the Jew profits by Germany's misfortunes, all of those things. It's obvious what the answer is, but just have a little go at that to give you a really good understanding of how this curriculum was designed to create anti-Semitic, hating, nasty adults. All right. And what would the Nazis then want to do to feel? What would the Nazis want people to feel? Sorry, at the end of their 40-week course. I've kind of just said that by accident. Angry, anti-Semitic, hateful, vengeful, revenge, all those things. That's the point of the history curriculum. And I guess we learn from history that we sometimes don't learn from history, but I don't believe a history curriculum should ever be designed to make you hate people. But clearly we are talking about a very extreme situation here, aren't we, in Nazi Germany? So bullying obviously goes on in schools, in every school, but in this school particularly, non-Aryans would get a really rough time, especially Jews. So this is an example of a bit of bullying. So Brett is the brightest boy in the class, and he's taken to wearing his Hitler Youth uniform in class. I was so jealous. I was a German too. He had his brown shirt, black trousers, black neckerchief and armband. He also had a dagger, a real dagger. He pulled it out regularly, showing it off. It had blood and honour engraved on it and Brett's name. Brett waved the dagger at me today, saying, "This is not for dirty Jews. This is for real enemies." So you can see how the sort of turning point from maybe one day a couple of years ago being this guy's friend in lower school, now that they're going through the Hitler Youth, you can see that Brett has changed. His anger, his vengeance, his nastiness towards this Jewish kid. Later on in a history lesson, they were making a battle plan and the teacher took the class into the barracks. I wasn't allowed in. The teacher said, "You, Hartland, you're a Jew. Jews can't come into army barracks." So again, that humiliation, the teacher is doing it as well. Brett hissed at me saying, "You'd sell our secrets to the enemy anyway." So you can see with Brett, you've seen it, you've done it, probably some of you, you've been unkind and you've been a bit nasty in the playground or in class. Maybe you've done a bit of side-eyeing or you've just sort of snarled or laughed at somebody. We've been there. That's what kids do. Sometimes kids are cruel. But this case, this is utterly horrendous. Then this one day, great news, the newspaper said, no Aryan German child will in future risk being contaminated by having to sit next to a Jew in school. I no longer needed to go to school. That's the little report from this Jewish kid who is describing what happened to him. So now we can see there's a point there where Jews are not allowed to go to school, which people will be delighted about. Unbelievable how that turn can go from being this kid's friend in primary school to now hating him and celebrating that he's gone, as well as laughing and celebrating when the teachers humiliate the Jewish kids in the class. This is just the worst possible thing and is an example of what happens in these extreme places and countries where propaganda is just so powerful. This is what happens, okay? And this is what we never want to see again, isn't it? All right, so that's how the bullying thing goes. So then the last little task, as I say, this is a short lesson, we're nearly finished now. Which of these values, as it would be a task, maybe the end of a lesson, of the qualities do you think the Nazis wanted to develop in young people? So you would obviously write down or circle or shout out the ones that you think the Nazis want to develop. So you can see duty, yes. Honour, yes. Physical courage, yes. Endurance, yes. Gentleness, no. Definitely not. They are not after gentle people. Intellect, intelligence, they are not after intelligence either. Obedience, yes. Strength, yes. Love of peace and humanity, no. So if anybody would have picked those words, you can imagine the absolute abuse that they would get by the teachers and by the rest of the kids in the class. So all that said, that's about 29 minutes, half an hour this lesson, but you get the idea of what the education system, its purpose was basically to create Nazis and teach people how to be good wives, good mothers, and all of the rest of it. So this source is just to think about. You can pause the video and read it yourself, just to show you that sort of not all kids necessarily went for it. The first bit of the source, he sort of says, I don't remember any of this National Socialist stuff. Probably wasn't listening. I don't know why he's saying that. But then he goes on to say at the end, we were programmed politically to obey orders, to cultivate the soldierly value of virtue, stand to attention, say yes, sir, and anytime anything comes up where the fatherland is mentioned, we have to switch off and just blindly accept it. He at least accepts, he understands that's what he was there for. All right, so this is from a school comment in the mid-1930s. It's interesting. He said, no one in our class ever read Mein Kampf. I myself had only used the book for quotes. Not sure, maybe that school was a bit more, I don't know, slower in the uptake, but the bottom half of this source is clear that he understands what he was there for. All right, so a mind map might be a good way to revise this. Just everything we've talked about, maybe without your notes, just try and do it off memory. Some pictures, some dual coding, perhaps different subjects, some of those things there, but make sure you understand those things there, especially the eugenics and stuff like that. And on YouTube, if you search for Education for Death cartoon, it's just brilliant. It's a little 10 minutes, 12 minutes maybe of a little cartoon that just shows the process of how they used education to manipulate and turn these innocent young kids into brutal monsters. If you missed the lesson, then the Education for Death will be in the Google Classroom. If you're watching this more randomly, then of course it will be on YouTube somewhere. All right, so as always, thank you very much. Hopefully this was useful. If not, or if you want to talk about any of it, just let your teachers know, and we'll see you next time for the next video. Thank you very much, and goodbye.